Thank you for joining us. I'm Marlon Bowling with you with a look at your ag commodity trade before we get our daytime session underway. And we have Rich Nelson on the line of Allendale Incorporated, and he joins us right now. We have some new numbers here, Rich, for the trade to chew on while they're waiting for these other reports to come out. It's our weekly export sales report, and it came out moments ago. Let's walk through these numbers, and I can't wait to hear your interpretation of what they may mean. So we'll begin here with a look at the corn export sales last week. Surprisingly strong at 1.49 million metric tons. That was up quite a bit from the previous week. It was up 16% from the 4-week average, and it was just slightly above even the highest trade guess there. Soybeans came in at 1 million metric tons. The estimate range ran from 450,000 to as much as 1 million, so it was right at the top end of expectations there. That was the old crop version was about 19% above a week ago. Soy meal, 221,800 tons this time around. It was in the upper third of the range of estimates. We had the soy oil at 32,900 tons. That was well above the highest trade guess. And wheat, 563,700 tons, and there again, that was above expectations. It only went up to about 500,000. All in all, you look at this, and it's kind of like, well, A, it was a pretty strong performance for the export sales, and B, how did they do that? We never heard much of overnight sales.
It's actually a very valid point here, and really important for us to keep in mind. These numbers are good through June 21st here, so this actually does include that big spike low in prices that we had back on the 19th. So this actually shows that we had some buyers come in and pretty much look at these grains as a value buy. So very aggressive buyers did show up on that last spike low in prices.
Very interesting point. I'm glad you brought that up. Now, we do have numbers for grain sorghum and cotton and rice as well. And the grain sorghum this time around was a big goose egg. Nothing, no sales, but no reductions either, I might add. The upland cotton came in with a total, if you combine the old crop and the new crop, by the way, the old crop had net reductions as they wrap up that. The combined total, 177,300 running bales. The rice, 31,400 tons. That was up significantly from the previous week, but it was down 38% from the 4-week average. Didn't know if you could read much into those numbers or not. Nothing going on with sorghum right now.
Exactly right, and this is something that trade's been watching here very closely these past few weeks, and certainly in terms of recent sales, we only had that minor 55,000-ton sale last week, but beyond that, numbers been kind of dry here as far as the overall sorghum exports here.
What about, excuse me, what about the overnight trade here? It looked like a softer tone again on the corn and the soybean markets here. The trade, I would imagine, probably going to get pretty quiet here ahead of tomorrow's quarterly stocks report and the actual acreage number, too.
You sure would guess. And certainly with this general viewpoint right now as far as these grains, everybody is looking at these acreage numbers, pointing out they're a relatively minor increase compared with what was discussed just 2 or 3 weeks ago. So certainly some questions still here in front of us, and we'll see what USDA has to say about it.
So the corn overnight was about 1 1/4 penny weaker at 351 1/4. Soybeans were very similar, actually, overnight. They were down 2 3/4 at 864 3/4. However, you did have a little bit of firmness in the wheat. In Chicago on the July contract was actually up 1.5 pennies at 481. Rich, we'll come back in a moment, and we'll get your thoughts on the livestock trade. A big report coming up later today. We also had beef and pork export numbers. We'll take a look at those in just a moment. We're back, and we are talking with Rich Nelson of Allendale Incorporated. He's in McHenry, Illinois, just outside Chicago, and we're going to take a look now at our beef and pork exports. Brace yourself. You might be surprised at these numbers that just came in from USDA. We talked about the grain exports being above expectations. Check this out for size. Beef exports this past week, 18,400 tons. That was up 10% from the previous week. And drum roll, please, look at the pork exports last week. 24,300 tons. It wasn't even 10,000 last week, so that was up significantly compared to a week ago. It was up 77% from just our 4-week average. I want to bring back into the conversation here, Rich Nelson, and get your thoughts on this, Rich. Big time number on the pork exports. That's been a while since we've seen a number that big.
It sure has, and this has maybe been a problem here for us these past few weeks. In fact, maybe 3 of the past 4 weeks had been slightly problem-based numbers, so this is a moderate concern here for us. And these numbers, in fact, biggest sales since April 19th. So good to see this rebound in pork exports. Let's see if this sales pace does last from here on out, though.
Interestingly, I'm looking at the participants that were buyers last week. Now, remember, last week we only had, I believe, 9,600 tons total of pork exports. This past week, Mexico alone bought 12,000 tons, just Mexico. And Japan was in there for 3,100 tons. We had South Korea in there for 2,400 tons. Even Australia bought 1,900, and Canada bought 1,800 tons. But you do not see China listed as a buyer on the pork side, even with that outstandingly high number. What if they would come back to the market?
That's actually a very valid discussion point here. So we'll see about these numbers for China. And it's actually really important to point out that Mexico, in fact, our sales so far to them this year, 6% under last year. So we could use a little more action from them. And certainly on the China side, we are also lower than last year as well on these weekly export sales numbers, too.
I guess the point is, with all the posturing with the NAFTA talks going on and everything, Mexico is still a key buyer nonetheless, even without that agreement there. So that is just something to keep in mind there. The demand still remains fairly strong overall. Okay, I want to talk about the Hogs and Pigs report coming out later on this afternoon. We have early estimates there. That'll come out after the markets close. And just so you know, for the all Hogs and Pigs estimate, the average trade guess is 103% of a year ago. In other words, a 3% increase. The kept for breeding number expected to be about 102%. And the kept for marketing number is fully expected to be about 103% of a year ago. What do you expect here in the hog trade today in advance of that report, Rich?
You know, obviously we probably will have some more or less quiet action here for today's discussion on futures. One thing we'll be watching very closely, trade expectation, like you mentioned, 3% more hogs as of right now. We'll be watching those farrowing intentions for future updates as far as future supplies. And right now, those numbers look a little better as far as good news, roughly about 1% higher than last year. So we'll see if that happens here.
Good point. All right. Thanks, Rich, for talking with us today. Rich Nelson of Allendale in McHenry, Illinois.